The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace's forecourt as tourists gathered in their usual clusters, cameras ready to capture the iconic changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, a 32-year-old construction worker from Birmingham, who had traveled to London for his mate's bachelor party. What should have been a simple sightseeing trip was about to become the most embarrassing moment of his life. Marcus had started drinking early that morning with his friends at their hotel bar. They had planned to watch the ceremony, then head to a pub for more celebrations. However, by the time they reached the palace gates, Marcus had already consumed 6 pints of beer and several shots of whiskey. His friends, equally intoxicated, thought it would be amusing to dare him into doing something memorable for the bachelor party photos. The royal guards stood motionless at their posts, their red tunics pristine, and their black bearskin hats towering above the crowd. These guards, members of the elite household division, had undergone years of rigorous training. They were real soldiers who had served in conflicts around the world, not just ceremonial figures for tourist entertainment. Their horses, magnificent, black geldings, stood equally still beside them, trained to remain calm despite the noise and chaos of thousands of daily visitors. Marcus stumbled closer to the barriers that separated tourists from the guards. His vision was blurry, and his judgment was severely impaired by alcohol. The crowd around him was thick with international visitors speaking various languages, children pointing excitedly at the guards, and street performers trying to earn money from the gathered audience. The atmosphere was festive, almost carnival-like, which only encouraged Marcus's reckless behavior. One particular horse caught Marcus's attention. The magnificent animal stood perfectly still next to its guard, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. The guard's face was expressionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. He had been standing, in position for over an hour, displaying the incredible discipline that made the Queen's Guard famous worldwide. Marcus's friends began chanting his name, urging him to approach the barrier. Other tourists started to notice the commotion, turning their cameras toward the obviously drunk man who was beginning to cause a scene. Some laughed, thinking it was part of the entertainment, while others looked concerned about what might happen. Next, the alcohol had completely clouded Marcus's judgment. In his intoxicated state, he began to believe that the guards were just actors in costumes, put there solely for tourist amusement. He had no understanding of the serious military nature of their duty or the strict protocols they followed. The idea of mounting one of their horses seemed hilarious to him, a perfect prank that would make for great stories back home. Security cameras positioned around the palace grounds were already recording everything. The Metropolitan Police officers stationed nearby had not yet noticed the brewing situation, as they were dealing with a separate incident involving pickpockets targeting tourists near the Victoria Memorial. The timing couldn't have been worse for what was about to unfold. Marcus took a deep breath and began to climb over the protective barrier. The metal fencing was not particularly high, designed more to guide tourist flow than to prevent determined intruders. His friends cheered him on, their phones now recording what they believed would be a harmless prank. None of them understood the serious legal and security implications of what Marcus was attempting. The moment his feet touched the restricted ground, several things happened simultaneously. The guard's horse, sensing an unauthorized presence, began to shift nervously. Its training kept it in position, but its ears flicked back and its muscles tensed. The guard himself remained motionless, but his eyes tracked Marcus's movement. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, though he hoped it wouldn't escalate further. Tourists began to gasp and point as they realized someone had actually crossed the barrier. Some started taking photos and videos, while others backed away, sensing that something serious was about to happen. A few responsible visitors began looking around for police officers, understanding that this was no longer harmless fun, but a potential security incident. Marcus approached the horse with stumbling steps, his arms outstretched as if greeting an old friend. The magnificent animal stood nearly 17 hands high, its black coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. This was a military horse trained for ceremonies and parades, accustomed to noise and crowds but not to drunk tourists attempting to mount it without permission. The guard finally broke his stoic pose slightly, his eyes now clearly focused on Marcus while still maintaining his ceremonial position. His training dictated that he should not move unless absolutely necessary, but he was prepared to act if the situation escalated to threaten his horse, himself, or the public's safety. Marcus reached out his hand toward the horse's neck, completely unaware of the storm he was about to unleash. His friends continued cheering, the crowd continued filming, and security remained blissfully unaware of the developing situation. The stage was set for an incident that would soon capture international attention and serve as a stark reminder of the serious nature of royal protocol. The horse snorted softly, its breath visible in the cool London air. This was not just any animal, but a highly trained military mount worth tens of thousands of pounds, with bloodlines carefully selected for temperament and ability. The idea that a drunk tourist might attempt to ride it was so outrageous that most people simply couldn't believe what they were witnessing. As Marcus's hand made contact with the horse's bridle, the animal's training and natural instincts began to conflict. It had been taught to remain still, but it also sensed danger from this unpredictable human. The next few moments would determine whether this would remain a minor embarrassment or escalate into something far more serious. The moment Marcus grabbed the horse's bridle, everything changed. The massive animal, trained for military precision but startled by the unexpected contact from an intoxicated stranger, took a nervous step backward. Its ears flattened against its head and its dark eyes showed the first signs of alarm. The guard, Trooper Williams, felt his horse's unease through the saddle and knew the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Marcus, emboldened by actually touching the horse and hearing his friend's continued encouragement, decided to attempt mounting the animal. In his alcohol-clouded mind, this seemed like the perfect culmination of his dare. He had no experience with horses, no understanding of their power or unpredictability, and certainly no appreciation for the serious military nature of what he was attempting to do. The crowd's reaction was mixed and growing louder by the second. Some tourists gasped in shock, others laughed nervously, and many continued filming what they believed would become viral content. A group of Japanese tourists backed away significantly, their cultural understanding of respect and protocol making them deeply uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior. Several British onlookers began muttering complaints about the embarrassment this man was causing their country. Trooper Williams faced an impossible situation. His strict military training demanded that he remain motionless and silent during ceremonial duties regardless of distractions or provocations. However, his horse was becoming increasingly agitated, and a drunk civilian was now attempting to climb onto a military mount worth more than most people's annual salaries. The conflict between protocol and practical safety created a tension that was visible in the subtle tightening of his jaw. Marcus grabbed the stirrup and attempted to hoist himself up, but his coordination was severely impaired by alcohol. His first attempt resulted in him stumbling and nearly falling backward into the growing crowd of onlookers. The horse shifted again, this time more dramatically, as it felt the unusual weight distribution and erratic movements. Its training battled against its natural flight response. Security cameras continued recording every moment, and somewhere in the Metropolitan Police control room, an operator was beginning to take notice of the unusual activity near the palace gates. However, the response wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, especially when the initial assessment suggests a minor tourist incident rather than a serious security threat. Marcus's second attempt to mount the horse was more successful, at least initially. He managed to get his left foot in the stirrup and was pulling himself up when the animal decided it had endured enough. The horse, feeling an unauthorized rider attempting to mount, did what centuries of breeding and training had taught it to do in potentially dangerous situations. It began to move. The movement wasn't violent or bucking, but it was firm and decisive. The horse stepped forward and slightly to the side, a maneuver designed to dislodge the unwanted passenger while maintaining the dignity befitting a royal mount. For Trooper Williams, this created an additional challenge as he had to maintain his seat and composure while his horse dealt with the unwanted attention. Marcus found himself hanging awkwardly from the side of the moving horse, one foot in the stirrup and his hands desperately gripping whatever he could find. The situation that had seemed hilarious moments before was now genuinely frightening. The ground looked much farther away than he had expected, and the powerful animal beneath him felt completely beyond his control. The crowd's mood shifted dramatically. Laughter turned to concern as people realized this was no longer a harmless prank, but a potentially dangerous situation. Parents began pulling their children back, and several voices could be heard shouting for someone to call the police. The festive atmosphere around the palace gates was quickly becoming tense and worried. Trooper Williams made a split-second decision that would later be debated in military circles. Breaking protocol for the first time in his 3-year career, he spoke. His voice was calm but commanding as he addressed Marcus directly. "Sir, you need to let go of my horse immediately. This is a military animal and you are in danger." The words cut through Marcus's alcohol-induced haze like a cold splash of water. For the first time since starting this misadventure, he began to understand the gravity of his situation. This wasn't a theme park attraction or a photo opportunity with a costumed actor. This was a real soldier on a real military horse, and he was trespassing on restricted government property. However, understanding the problem and solving it were two different things. Marcus was now in a position where letting go would likely result in a painful fall onto the cobblestones, but holding on meant continuing to provoke an increasingly agitated military horse. His friends, finally grasping the seriousness of the situation, stopped cheering and began shouting contradictory advice. The horse, feeling the continued irregular weight and movement, began to demonstrate why military mounts require extensive training. It executed a precise sidestep maneuver that would have been perfectly normal during a parade, but was disastrous for someone hanging precariously from its stirrup. Marcus felt his grip slipping, and his precarious position becoming untenable. Tourists began backing away more seriously now, creating a wider circle around the unfolding drama. Several people were actively filming, and at least 3 had already begun uploading content to social media platforms with hashtags like Buckingham Palace and your Royal Guard horse. The incident was beginning its journey from local embarrassment to international news story. Metropolitan police officers, finally alerted by radio calls from the control room, began moving toward the scene. However, they were positioned at various points around the palace perimeter, and it would take several minutes for them to navigate through the dense crowds of tourists to reach the specific location where Marcus was creating chaos. The situation reached a critical point when the horse, trained for military precision but pushed beyond its comfort zone by an unpredictable drunk civilian, made a decision that would transform this incident from embarrassing prank to serious emergency. The animal began to move with more purpose, no longer content to simply endure the unwanted attention, but actively seeking to resolve the problem through the methods its training had provided. The horse's decisive movement sent Marcus tumbling to the cobblestones with a sickening thud that echoed across the palace forecourt. The crowd collectively gasped, and several people screamed as they watched him hit the ground hard. His friends rushed forward, their earlier amusement replaced by genuine concern as they saw their mate lying motionless on the historic stones. Trooper Williams, still maintaining his ceremonial position despite the chaos, felt his training and human compassion warring within him. The horse, having successfully dislodged its unwanted passenger, returned to its trained stance but remained alert and slightly agitated. Its ears continued to flick nervously as it processed the unusual situation and the growing commotion around. Marcus groaned and slowly began to move, indicating he was conscious but clearly injured. His left shoulder appeared to be causing him significant pain, and there was a growing bruise on his forehead where it had contacted the cobblestones. His expensive jacket, purchased specifically for the bachelor party, was now torn and dirty, a physical reminder of his poor decision-making. The crowd's reaction was swift and varied. Several tourists immediately began providing first aid, including a retired nurse from Canada, who knelt beside Marcus to assess his injuries. Others continued filming, recognizing they were witnessing something that would likely become news. A few responsible individuals were actively seeking police officers or palace security personnel. Within minutes, the incident had already begun spreading across social media. Videos taken by multiple tourists showed different angles of Marcus's fall and the hashtag drunk tourist fail was beginning to trend. The incident was transforming from a local embarrassment into viral content that would soon reach millions of viewers worldwide. Metropolitan police officers finally arrived at the scene, their radios crackling with updates and instructions. Constable Sarah Mitchell, a 10-year veteran of the force, immediately took control of the situation. Her training in crowd control and public order incidents made her the natural leader as multiple officers converged on the location. The first priority was Marcus's medical condition. Despite his obvious intoxication, his injuries appeared serious enough to warrant immediate attention. An ambulance was called, and the area around him was cleared to provide space for emergency medical personnel. His friends, sobered by the reality of the situation, provided officers with Marcus's identification and contact information. Trooper Williams remained at his post, though his horse continued to show signs of stress from the incident. Military protocol dictated that he could not abandon his position without direct orders from a superior officer, even in these extraordinary circumstances. However, his commanding officer was already en route, having been notified through the chain of command about the security breach. The incident had created a significant disruption to normal palace operations. Tours were temporarily halted, and additional security personnel were deployed to manage the growing crowd of curious onlookers. The palace's public relations team was already preparing statements about the incident, knowing that media inquiries would begin arriving within hours. Marcus, now more lucid thanks to the shock of his fall and the pain from his injuries, began to understand the full magnitude of his mistake. Through his clearing vision, he could see the uniformed police officers, the concerned faces of strangers, and the multiple cameras still recording his humiliation. The reality of potential criminal charges was beginning to penetrate his alcohol-clouded consciousness. The emergency medical team arrived with impressive efficiency, their bright uniforms and professional equipment drawing even more attention to the scene. The paramedics quickly assessed Marcus's condition, checking for signs of serious head injury or internal trauma. Their calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the chaos and excitement of the surrounding crowd. As Marcus was being treated, Constable Mitchell began conducting preliminary interviews with witnesses. The accounts were remarkably consistent, with multiple tourists describing how they had watched a clearly intoxicated man climb over the barrier and attempt to mount a royal guard's horse. The video evidence from dozens of phones would provide additional documentation of the incident. The legal implications were becoming clear. Marcus faced potential charges including trespassing on government property, public intoxication, interfering with military personnel, and endangering public safety. Each charge carried significant penalties, and the high-profile nature of the incident meant that prosecutors would likely pursue the case aggressively to deter similar behavior. Palace security officials arrived to conduct their own assessment of the breach. The incident represented a failure of the protective systems designed to prevent unauthorized access to restricted areas. While Marcus posed no serious threat, his success in reaching the guards highlighted potential vulnerabilities that would need to be addressed. The horse, gradually calming under Trooper Williams's steady presence, served as a reminder of the serious military nature of what tourists often viewed as mere ceremony. These animals were not props for entertainment, but highly trained military assets, each representing a significant investment in time, money, and training. The idea that a drunk tourist might attempt to ride one was both absurd and deeply offensive to military tradition. Marcus's friends found themselves in an awkward position as witnesses to their mate's poor judgment. Their earlier encouragement of his behavior now seemed incredibly irresponsible, and they were beginning to understand that they might also face questions about their role in the incident. The bachelor party they had planned was turning into a legal and public relations nightmare. The media attention was escalating rapidly. Local news teams were already en route to the palace, having been alerted by social media posts and police radio traffic. The incident had all the elements of a perfect news story: royal protocol, drunk tourist behavior, dramatic video footage, and potential legal consequences. International tourists continued to gather, drawn by the unusual activity and emergency vehicles. Many were confused about what had happened, with rumors spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Some believed there had been a terrorist incident, while others thought it was part of a planned ceremony they had never heard of before. As the ambulance prepared to transport Marcus to the hospital for further evaluation, the full scope of his actions was becoming clear to everyone involved. What had begun as a drunken prank had evolved into a significant security incident with potential diplomatic implications, given the international attention it was receiving. The ambulance doors closed with Marcus inside, but the incident was far from over. As the emergency vehicle pulled away with lights flashing, Constable Mitchell began the formal process of documenting what would become one of the most widely discussed tourist incidents in recent palace history. The crowd remained large and curious, with many people still filming and sharing content on social media platforms. Major Henderson, Trooper Williams's commanding officer, arrived at the scene with the swift efficiency expected of a career military officer. His stern expression and crisp uniform immediately commanded respect from both the police officers and the remaining crowd. He conducted a brief consultation with Trooper Williams, who maintained his professional composure despite the extraordinary circumstances he had just endured. The conversation between the officers was conducted in the clipped, precise language of military protocol. Trooper Williams provided a factual account of the incident, describing Marcus's approach, his attempt to mount the horse, and the animal's response. His report was professional and objective, showing no personal opinion about the civilians' behavior, though his relief at resolving the situation safely was evident to his experienced commander. Major Henderson's assessment was swift and decisive. The incident represented a significant breach of security protocol, but it also demonstrated the effectiveness of the guards' training and the reliability of their mounts under unexpected pressure. The horse had responded exactly as trained, removing the threat without causing excessive harm to the intruder or danger to the public. Media crews began arriving at the palace gates, their satellite trucks and professional cameras marking a new phase in the incident's evolution. News directors across London had recognized the story's potential for international interest, combining as it did elements of British royal tradition, tourist behavior, and dramatic visual content that would play well on television and online platforms. The palace's press office was already fielding calls from journalists seeking official statements about the incident. The delicate balance between maintaining the dignity of royal institutions and acknowledging the reality of what had occurred required careful consideration. Any official response would need to be measured and professional, while also serving as a deterrent to future similar behavior. At the hospital, Marcus was undergoing medical evaluation, while police officers waited to conduct a formal interview. His injuries, while painful, were determined to be non-life-threatening. The primary concern was a possible concussion from his impact with the cobblestones, along with significant bruising and a dislocated shoulder that would require several weeks of recovery. His friends had followed the ambulance to the hospital, their bachelor party celebration thoroughly derailed by the incident. The group dynamics had shifted dramatically, with the earlier encouragement of reckless behavior replaced by concern about potential legal consequences. They were beginning to understand that their holiday could result in serious criminal charges and international embarrassment. The social media explosion was unprecedented. Videos of Marcus's fall were being shared across multiple platforms, with commentary ranging from amused to outraged. The incident was being discussed in multiple languages, with international users expressing various opinions about tourist behavior, British security, and the appropriateness of Marcus's actions. Professional news organizations were beginning to pick up the story, with BBC News, Sky News, and international outlets preparing reports for their evening broadcasts. The incident was being framed as part of a broader discussion about tourist behavior at significant cultural and historical sites, with Marcus serving as an unfortunate example of what not to do. Palace security officials were conducting a comprehensive review of the protective measures around the guards' positions. While the barriers had been designed primarily for crowd control rather than security, the ease with which Marcus had crossed them raised questions about whether additional measures might be necessary to prevent similar incidents. The legal process was beginning to move forward with typical British efficiency. Crown Prosecution Service lawyers were reviewing the available evidence to determine appropriate charges, while Metropolitan Police detectives prepared for formal interviews with Marcus once his medical treatment was completed. The high-profile nature of the case meant it would receive careful attention from senior prosecutors. Tourism industry representatives were expressing concern about the potential impact of the incident on Britain's reputation as a welcoming destination for international visitors. The image of a drunk tourist attempting to mount a Royal Guards horse was exactly the kind of story that could reinforce negative stereotypes about British drinking culture and tourist behavior. Marcus's family back in Birmingham were becoming aware of the incident through social media and news reports. His mother, watching the evening news, was horrified to see her son's face on television, in connection with what the newsreader described as an unprecedented breach of royal protocol. The family's embarrassment was compounded by the international nature of the coverage. The incident was also generating discussion among military personnel about the challenges of ceremonial duties in the modern age of social media and mass tourism. Serving guards recognized that their colleagues' professional response had prevented a potentially much more serious situation, but they also understood the unique pressures of maintaining military discipline while being constantly filmed by tourists. Educational institutions were beginning to use the incident as a case study in multiple contexts. Tourism management courses discussed it as an example of the challenges facing heritage sites in managing visitor behavior. Law schools examined the intersection of military protocol, public order, and criminal law. Media studies programs analyzed the rapid spread of viral content and its impact on traditional news cycles. The horse involved in the incident, whose name was Regent, was receiving additional attention from veterinary staff to ensure the stress of the unusual situation had not caused any physical or psychological effects. Military horses undergo extensive training to remain calm in difficult situations, but the direct physical contact from an intoxicated civilian represented a scenario that stretched even their professional preparation. International diplomatic circles were taking note of the incident as well. Embassy staff from various countries were preparing guidance for their citizens about appropriate behavior when visiting significant British cultural sites. The incident was becoming a teachable moment about respecting local customs and the serious nature of ceremonial military duties. As evening approached, the immediate crisis phase of the incident was concluding, but its broader implications were just beginning to unfold. Marcus's moment of drunken poor judgment was evolving into a complex story involving law enforcement, military protocol, international media attention, and cultural discussions about tourism in the modern world. The following morning brought a media firestorm that Marcus could never have anticipated when he made his drunken decision. His face was plastered across newspaper front pages from London to Tokyo, with headlines ranging from "Tourists Royal," "Blunder" to "The Man Who Tried to Steal the Queen's Horse." The incident had achieved the kind of international notoriety that most people never experience in their entire lifetime. Marcus woke up in his hospital bed with a pounding headache that wasn't entirely from his concussion. The reality of his situation was becoming clearer as nurses showed him newspaper articles and his phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, missed calls, and social media notifications. His attempt to check his Facebook page revealed thousands of friend requests and comments, most of them highly unflattering. The legal consequences were mounting rapidly. Detective Inspector James Crawford had arrived at the hospital to conduct a formal interview, accompanied by a duty solicitor who would represent Marcus during the questioning. The charges being considered included criminal trespass, public disorder, interfering with military personnel in the execution of their duties, and endangering public safety, each carrying potential fines and imprisonment. Marcus's employer, back in Birmingham, had learned about the incident through the morning news broadcasts. The construction company's management was deeply embarrassed by the association with their employees' behavior, particularly given their occasional work on government contracts. A disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Marcus's return, with the strong possibility of immediate termination for bringing the company into disrepute. The bachelor party group was dealing with their own consequences. Hotel management had received complaints from other guests about the noise and behavior leading up to the incident. 2 members of the group had been asked to leave the hotel, while others faced questioning from police about their role in encouraging Marcus's dangerous behavior. The celebration they had planned was turning into a nightmare of legal and social complications. International media coverage was expanding beyond the initial incident to examine broader questions about tourism, alcohol, consumption, and respect for cultural institutions. American talk show hosts were using the story as comedy material, while European newspapers were treating it as a serious discussion about the challenges facing historic sites in managing modern tourism pressures. The palace was implementing immediate changes to prevent similar incidents. Additional barriers were being installed around the guards' positions, and security personnel were being repositioned to provide better coverage of potential problem areas. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities in crowd control that could have had much more serious consequences if Marcus had been a genuine security threat rather than just a drunk tourist. Trooper Williams found himself at the center of unexpected attention. Military protocols typically keep individual guards anonymous, but his professional handling of the situation had made him something of a hero among his colleagues. His restraint in not overreacting to Marcus's behavior, while still maintaining the dignity of his position, was being cited as an example of excellent military bearing under pressure. The tourism industry was scrambling to address potential damage to Britain's reputation as a welcoming destination. Tourism boards were emphasizing the isolated nature of the incident while also using it as an opportunity to educate visitors about appropriate behavior at cultural and historical sites. The story was becoming a cautionary tale shared in guidebooks and travel websites worldwide. Marcus's hometown newspaper in Birmingham had picked up the story, making him infamous in his local community. Neighbors were giving interviews about their shock at seeing someone they knew involved in such an embarrassing international incident. The local pub where Marcus was a regular customer reported being contacted by national media seeking background information about his character and drinking habits. Social media analysis showed the incident had generated millions of interactions across various platforms. Memes were being created faster than they could be counted, with Marcus's awkward position hanging from the horse's stirrup becoming a symbol for poor decision-making. The hashtag #HorseGate was trending internationally, with users sharing their own stories of tourist embarrassments. Legal experts were debating the appropriate response to the incident in television interviews and newspaper opinion pieces. Some argued for harsh punishment to deter similar behavior, while others suggested that Marcus's humiliation and the international attention were punishment enough. The case was becoming a test of how seriously Britain would treat disrespect toward royal institutions. The incident was also sparking discussions about alcohol consumption and public behavior. Medical professionals were using Marcus's case to highlight the dangers of excessive drinking, particularly in unfamiliar environments where judgment becomes impaired. His blood alcohol level, measured at the hospital, was more than 3 times the legal driving limit. Educational institutions were incorporating the incident into their curricula as a case study in multiple disciplines. Business schools examined the crisis management responses of various organizations involved. Psychology programs discussed the incident as an example of how alcohol affects decision-making and risk assessment. International relations courses analyzed the diplomatic implications of tourist behavior abroad. The horse regent had become an unexpected celebrity in his own right. Social media accounts dedicated to military horses were sharing his photograph and history, celebrating his professional response to the unusual situation. Gifts and treats were arriving from around the world from people who appreciated the animal's restraint and training. Marcus's family was dealing with their own media attention. Reporters had contacted his mother, siblings, and former teachers, seeking background information and personal insights. The family was maintaining a dignified silence while privately dealing with their embarrassment and concern for Marcus's legal situation. The incident was also highlighting broader questions about the intersection of traditional ceremonial duties and modern tourism. Military historians were discussing how guards throughout history had dealt with public interactions, while contemporary security experts examined the challenges of maintaining dignified ceremonies in an age of mass tourism and social media. International law enforcement agencies were taking note of the incident as an example of how quickly local incidents could become global news stories. The rapid spread of video content and social media commentary had transformed what might once have been a minor local court case into an international diplomatic and cultural discussion. As Marcus prepared for his police interview, the full scope of his brief moment of poor judgment was becoming apparent. His decision to attempt mounting a Royal Guards horse had evolved far beyond personal embarrassment into a complex international incident involving law enforcement, military protocol, diplomatic considerations, and cultural discussions about appropriate behavior in the modern world. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus stood outside Westminster Magistrates' Court, facing the consequences of his momentary lapse in judgment. The media attention had somewhat diminished, but photographers still gathered to capture images of the man who had become known internationally as the tourist who tried to steal the Queen's horse. His shoulder was still in a sling, a visible reminder of his painful encounter with the palace cobblestones. The court proceedings had been swift but thorough. Marcus had pleaded guilty to all charges, accepting responsibility for his actions with the guidance of his legal representative. The magistrate, Mrs. Justice Patricia Fleming, had listened to arguments from both the prosecution and defense before delivering a sentence that balanced punishment with the recognition that Marcus posed no genuine security threat. The final verdict included a substantial fine, community service hours to be completed in his hometown of Birmingham, and a 5-year ban from entering any royal properties or attending ceremonial events. The sentence was designed to serve as both punishment and deterrent, sending a clear message about the serious consequences of disrespecting royal protocol while acknowledging Marcus's genuine remorse and the accidental nature of his actions. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced the media for the first time since the incident. His statement was brief but heartfelt, expressing sincere apologies to the Royal Guards, the palace staff, the tourists whose experience had been disrupted, and the British people for his disrespectful behavior. He acknowledged that alcohol was no excuse for his actions and announced his decision to seek help for his drinking problem. The tourism industry had adapted quickly to prevent similar incidents. New signs in multiple languages now clearly explained the serious military nature of the Royal Guards and the severe penalties for interfering with their duties. The barriers around guard positions had been reinforced and extended, making unauthorized access significantly more difficult, while maintaining the ceremonial dignity of the site. Trooper Williams had returned to his normal duties, though he had been quietly commended by his superior officers for his professional handling of an extraordinary situation. His restraint and adherence to protocol while managing a potentially dangerous incident had earned him respect throughout the military hierarchy. The horse regent showed no lasting effects from the encounter and continued to serve with distinction. Marcus's hometown reaction had been mixed but generally supportive. While many neighbors expressed embarrassment about the negative attention brought to Birmingham, others recognized that everyone makes mistakes and appreciated his willingness to take responsibility for his actions. The local pub where he was a regular customer had even created a drink called the Royal Tumble, in dubious honor of his misadventure. The incident had lasting effects on tourism policies at heritage sites across Britain. Many locations reviewed their security procedures and crowd control measures, recognizing that the combination of mass tourism, alcohol consumption, and social media created new challenges for protecting cultural institutions. Training programs for security staff now included modules on managing intoxicated visitors and preventing similar incidents. International media had gradually moved on to other stories, but Marcus's incident had entered the realm of internet folklore. His awkward tumble from the horse had become a popular GIF, used to illustrate poor decision-making, and his story was frequently referenced in articles about tourist behavior and cultural respect. The phrase, "pulling a Marcus," had briefly entered British slang to describe acts of drunken stupidity with public consequences. Educational institutions continued to use the incident as a teaching tool. Law students studied the case as an example of how seemingly minor crimes could have major consequences when they involved respected institutions. Tourism management courses examined the incident as a case study in crisis management and reputation protection. Psychology programs discussed it in the context of alcohol's effects on judgment and decision-making. Marcus had indeed sought help for his drinking problem, as promised in his courthouse statement. The shock of the international humiliation and legal consequences had served as a wake-up call about his relationship with alcohol. He was attending regular counseling sessions and had joined a support group for people with drinking problems, finding that his notorious story actually helped others understand the potential consequences of excessive drinking. His employment situation had been resolved more favorably than expected. While his original construction company had terminated his employment, another local firm had hired him after the initial media attention died down. His new employer appreciated his honesty about the incident and his commitment to addressing his alcohol problem. The experience had actually made him a more careful and responsible worker. The bachelor party incident had strengthened the friendships within the group in unexpected ways. The shared experience of dealing with the legal and social consequences had brought them closer together, and they had all made commitments to be more responsible in their future celebrations. The groom's wedding had proceeded successfully, though Marcus's story had provided entertainment that overshadowed many of the planned festivities. Palace operations had returned to normal, though guides now regularly told the story as an example of inappropriate tourist behavior. The incident had actually increased interest in the changing of the guard ceremony, with tourist numbers rising as people hoped to witness similar excitement, though the enhanced security measures made any repeat incidents highly unlikely. 3. Long-term impact on Marcus's life was profound and lasting. Beyond the immediate legal and financial consequences, the incident had fundamentally changed how he viewed personal responsibility and the potential consequences of impulsive actions. He had learned that in the age of social media and instant global communication, a single moment of poor judgment could have effects that lasted far longer than anyone might expect. His relationship with alcohol had been permanently altered by the experience. The association between drinking and public humiliation was so strong that Marcus found himself naturally moderating his consumption even in private settings. Friends and family noticed a significant change in his personality, describing him as more thoughtful and considerate than he had been before the incident. The story had also affected his dating life in unexpected ways. While some potential partners were put off by his notoriety, others were intrigued by his honesty about the experience and his efforts to learn from it. He had learned to address the incident directly in conversations, using it as an example of personal growth rather than trying to hide from his past. Marcus had received hundreds of letters and emails from people around the world who had seen news coverage of the incident. Many shared their own stories of embarrassing mistakes and poor decisions, thanking him for inadvertently showing that everyone was capable of spectacular errors in judgment. Some letters came from people struggling with alcohol problems who found inspiration in his commitment to addressing his drinking. The incident continued to generate occasional media attention on anniversaries and in retrospective articles about unusual tourist behavior. Marcus had learned to accept this attention gracefully, understanding that his story served a useful purpose in educating others about appropriate behavior and the consequences of excessive drinking. Professional consequences had largely faded as the immediate media attention diminished. Marcus had proven himself to be a reliable and skilled worker in his new job, and his colleagues had learned to appreciate his honesty and self-awareness. The incident had become part of his personal history rather than a defining characteristic. The Royal Guards had incorporated the incident into their training programs, using it as an example of how to maintain professional composure under unusual circumstances. New guards learned about the importance of protocol, while also understanding the human elements that could create unexpected challenges during ceremonial duties. 1 year after the incident, Marcus made a private visit to Buckingham Palace as a regular tourist, keeping a respectful distance from the guards and barriers. He spent several minutes watching the ceremony he had disrupted, reflecting on how different his life might have been if he had simply enjoyed the spectacle like millions of other visitors before and after him. The horse regent had continued his distinguished service completely unaffected by his brief moment of internet fame. Military horses, unlike their human counterparts, had no awareness of social media or public attention, making Regent perhaps the only participant in the incident who remained entirely unchanged by the experience. As Marcus walked away from the palace that day, He carried with him a profound understanding of how individual actions could ripple outward in unexpected ways. His moment of drunken foolishness had become a teaching tool used around the world, a reminder that in our interconnected age, personal responsibility extended far beyond immediate consequences to include the broader impact of our choices on institutions, communities, and cultures we might never have considered.